I'm Vinay Bayer in conversation with Amit Chatterjee. Welcome to Missing Link. Growth is a function of your investment in complexity. That's the topic for today, and I would want Amit to share us, insights on this. Welcome, Amit.
Innovation, growth, entry barriers, competitive advantage for individuals as well as organizations come through the leadership behavior of these individuals. It doesn't come just from a strategy that you buy from some consulting company. Sorry. No, it doesn't. It comes from individuals who actually lead. Growth is not the same for different people depending on which stage of life they are in. It is natural for people to deal with what is simple for them. And what is not simple is what we are referring to as complexity. I can speak about and share is this, that you have to ask yourself, do you need to jump into complexity? And then Stacey shows that even if people are in agreement on the y-axis, you are not entirely certain about what has to be done. So you need some people to dig deeper, find out what needs to be done, how it has to be done.
With your experience, you've been a life coach, executive coach, and also coached as a manager. So according to you, what is growth? How do you define it?
Oh, that's a lovely question. Thank you for that. Because obviously growth is not the same for different people depending on which stage of life they are in, which stage of career they are in. I mean, when, for example, we were young and we started off, we wanted to grow for sure. But the context in which we had to grow, or the horizons that we could breach through our growth, were very different to when we were, say, we had 10 years behind us, for example. So growth is different for people on a trajectory level, depending on where in the trajectory they are in. Organizationally, you start, as nowadays I hear this term IC. Of course, we always had individual contributors. That's how everybody starts in the beginning, right? And then you come to a level where probably you become a team lead, or you lead a team, and then you also grow up to the next levels where you probably have to work a lot and create value by working with peers. And finally, you go to a level where you have to also work a lot with the management. So I'm just kind of seeing that there are kind of 4 stages anyway for anybody's career to grow. But the point is that every time you cross that stage, IC to team lead to maybe middle manager, and middle manager to senior management, you have to, and you do, knowingly or unknowingly, you do invest in complexity.
What is complexity? I mean, just to understand in simple terms for us.
Well, anyway, see, words in English are always about semantics, so there can be several frameworks that one could bring in, but I would probably stick to 1 or 2 frameworks. So complexity for me is when I'm dealing with uncertainty. I'm dealing with lack of agreement. People are not really still agreeing to do things or get into stuff. And so hence, it's complexity for me. Complexity is also when I'm dealing with unknowns. Now, when I'm young, when I'm starting for freshers, or maybe even with 5 or 6 years behind, complexity is a lot about explicit knowledge that they are yet to acquire, right? So they need a lot of experience, practice in what they're doing. In addition to that, they also need training, as they go on to embrace more and more newer as well as more valuable kinds of explicit knowledge. By explicit knowledge, as you know, sorry, what I mean is this, that what you gain through education, what you gain as skills through actual training and practice. And explicit knowledge is something which you, as well as your competitors on an individual plane, we can speak about organizations or teams also, but even on a context of teams or organizations, your competition also is able to gain, provided they practice and buy those explicit knowledge or skills. But then beyond that, there is the implicit knowledge or tacit knowledge, which you gain through experience, through wisdom that you soak in, which probably is coming in also when your managers coach you, including your parents or your elders or your seniors, for example. So there are These are the two frameworks. One is, as I mentioned, that you're dealing with unknowns, okay, and you have to then gain more and more explicit knowledge, and then you come across a stage in your context where you also gain tacit knowledge, which you cannot gain just by studying and getting trained, but you have to gain out of experiencing things and doing things. And the other paradigm is that where you are dealing with uncertainty, okay, and you are dealing also with lack of agreement.
I mean, for a natural instinct of a person will be to get onto anything on a simpler note. And there is also this deep diving into the complexity side of things. How do they balance it?
You said it rightly that natural instinct is to get into what is simple because it is easier. It's also about what I'm comfortable with, I'm probably even good at, and I can even do it repeatedly and give repeat consistent performance. So it is natural for people to deal with what is simple for them. And what is not simple is what we are referring to as complexity. So the moment you kind of branch out into it, whether knowingly or even unknowingly, and sometimes it's like you get singed by it. Oh my God, this is hot. This is something risky. This is something that I'm not very sure of. But my point is that unless you invest in this zone of complexity, you cannot grow. Because if you are limited to what you know very well, you do very well, there are others also know the same thing because you're dealing still with explicit knowledge, okay? What is explicit for you? It may be not explicit for somebody who is, junior to you or somebody who is earlier than you in the trajectory of growth. But you are where you are. For example, whether you are put in 5 years in a certain domain or 12 years in a certain function, what you do every day, okay, is simple tasks for you.
One has to take that leap, is what you told. Something has to motivate them to do that. So what motivates them to take that, how handling complexity, works for them?
Since you asked that question, and I think it is so important what you asked, what can motivate people to kind of jump into or plunge into relative complexity for them is when they ask themselves, where am I and where do I want to be? Suppose, for example, I give you an example. Somebody is heading a production team in whatever domain, doesn't matter. So he or she has been already in that particular function of production for a longer time. That manager, that leader is very much conversant with, the processes, systems, tools, technologies, everything that has to be handled by that person on a day-to-day level, whether it's on a planning level, whether it's on a, checking on, for example, reviewing, assessing, motivating the team, for example. So, but now this person cannot keep on doing this or playing this role for just X number of years and X, going into infinity, right? Because somebody will be able to do his role also, maybe from his immediate team, as good as he does, maybe at a lower cost. And that management, the management of that company would one day look at that other person or the alternative. Now, if I'm not thinking as a production manager or as a finance manager or as a sales manager or an R&D manager or whatever, whichever function I am in, am I adding relatively better value for the cost that I have in the organization than the alternatives available to my management? If not even in so many words, but somebody has to, one has to, kind of reflect and question, how long can I be in this lovely, beautiful beach kind of a role? Because you also get used to doing it. It's so easy for you. Sometimes it gets boring for you. And sometimes if you get bored only, then you look across and you think across, what else can I do so that I can make my life more interesting? So it depends on people. It depends, it varies from individual to individual because we are all wired differently, as we have spoken in our former episodes. So different people think about what is complexity for them depending on how they are wired. So we are not probably getting into, these different kinds of people that we have from a psychological personality point of view as of now. But having said that, it is also important that equally differently, different people also, cross the Rubicon and plunge into complexity. It's not same for everybody. Okay, you would do it in a different way. I would do it for a different reason, for example, or different way, because we are made differently. And that's why they need somebody to kind of handhold, somebody who has the experience. It can be, as I always say, a manager who can coach this person, or a coach that you take on from somewhere else.
Now that we have established it's important that we invest on our complexities, how do we go about investing on our complexities?
I can speak about and share is this, that you have to ask yourself, do you need to jump into complexity? Once you answer that, once you start feeling that your anxiety levels are going up because where I am is a comfort zone and I can't be here for long, then there are other factors that will make you catapult and plunge into complexity. It could be, for example, your different motivations. Okay, you see that if you go into where things are complex for you, you will gain probably more money, more status, so that the typical motivation influences that come in. It could be also that once you jump into complexity, you want to learn more, and that's your tendency, and you will learn more because what you don't know today. It could also be that this is what will make you kind of reach that horizon or that purpose or the goal that is beyond your current comfort zone. So there are different reasons people kind of plunge into complexity and invest into it. We can speak about how to invest later. But the reason that people cross the Rubicon and jump into complexity are various. That depends on who you are, in the context of what you are in. And that's why you need some experience which you can gain from not only being coached by some senior person in your organization or from outside, but also by reading, which is not very common nowadays because people are so much pushed for time and they don't really even pause to think whether I can read a book. Probably everybody has some time, half an hour, maybe in a car or maybe in a taxi or in a flight. But I don't know. I don't have the statistics, what is the sales of books going on in airport bookstalls. In my time, when I was younger, they used to just fly away from the book racks. Maybe it does, maybe there are still enough buyers. That's a different issue.
In your experience for an individual and for the organization, both, is there a point where they will realize that investing in complexities for the growth will happen?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, see, one thing that has to be taken for granted, that if you have to realize that yes, there is now time that you have to invest in complexity, first of all, you are in the business of leadership. Whether you are leading yourself as an individual, whether you're leading your team, your organization, your company, but you are at the end in the business of leadership. Not everybody is, I would say, blessed or cursed with this feeling that I want to be a leader. I use both these words because sometimes it's a blessing if you kind of have a good life being a leader. Sometimes it's a curse because you may end up in what you say, burnouts or depression or whatever it is. So be it as it may, unless you are in the business of leadership, you will not really think about what is complex. People who are very, very, strongly driven by their knowledge that they have, and they gain a lot of satisfaction in doing the best with the knowledge that they have. Sometimes they may not discover that there is complexity that they can breach and discover a new world. So it's not that they're scared. It is probably because they're so happy, so contented with what they know, and there's enough to do still. And sometimes, trains pass by, flights zoom above their heads. They don't even come to know that things have happened. Their company got acquired, and suddenly they are hit by a truck saying, oh, there is somebody else who is going to take over your role. So, you're either horizontally moved somewhere or you are asked to find something new somewhere else. So that's when people get shocked. But then different people as I say, are wired differently, so we cannot generalize this whole scenario. But you have to be in the business of leadership to really, identify this very fact, as you asked, that you need to invest in complexity.
When you are a manager with business context, I'm checking this. Can you give me an example where embracing into complexities has resulted in a significant growth?
I had a manager who was, I had recruited myself as heading a small production that we had just set up at that time. And he was excellent. He was absolutely very good in production management in the particular domain that we were working. And he was very happy to do what had to be done. But we were still quite young as an organization in organizational structures, and also more importantly, having people who were very good in each of the functions. We were growing fast. He was a little bit reticent to get into those other functional areas, which was not typically under the definition of production management. I could see that. I could empathize that this is not something that he feels his job. One, two is that it is not really his domain. But he had actually a complete understanding of what needs to be done. And I'm talking about particularly the quality management aspect. And I didn't have a good quality manager. I couldn't just, bring in somebody overnight. So I requested him, I tried to kind of discuss with him what should be done first. And he came to the conclusion, yes, we need to do a better job on the quality management side. Finally, I said that why don't you spend a week with our vendors, where we are having these problems for. And he was a bit shocked or surprised that I asked him to do that. But, well, I stuck to it in a not very, I would say, rabid manner. And he did it. But he did it very, very reluctantly from an emotional point of view. But he did it. But since he was a guy who was good with process, as I mentioned, systems or tools, so he could go in, within 5 days, he could bring in those changes in our vendors' processes. And the vendors were not so happy because this guy was really good and they had to do it for sure. And his style of getting it done was different from probably, mine or yours. But it got done. And our rejections in quality from our vendors, which was somewhere, touching the sky at 26%, came down to under 2% within 30 days.
That's significant.
So, but here I had to cajole, coax, and use all my, whatever mental resources I had to make him do that. But having done it, then he realized that this is something that actually, not immediately, but a little bit, few years later, he realized that, this is what is about entire operations. And finally, I brought him to as heading the operations, which includes quality, which includes supply chain. And then he was fine with it. And he grew. But initially, he was very reluctant.
You also wear a hat of being a life coach. And similarly, an example or anecdote of how it has impacted them personally. Can you come up with one?
Well, I could, normally my coaching experiences or details with my clients are obviously held very confidential. So I would not refer to any particular detail. But what comes to my mind immediately is during the COVID times, a lot of managers went through horrific situations. And one of them that comes to my mind is that a manager who had grown till pre-COVID times as an engineering manager of a company, and he was there for almost 12 years in that same company. But just before COVID, his company got acquired by another company, a larger company, whatever. And due to different reasons that comes out of acquisitions, is he was already in a senior position. He was asked to leave. And then within a few months, COVID struck. Now, the complexity that when he contacted me and we started with doing sessions, within few sessions, it was clear to me that he cannot get back to exactly where he was. And not only from the CTC point of view, but also from the role point of view. Probably had to do something different. So one of the tasks as a coach that obviously is very dear to me and very, very precious to me is not just to, explain to my client, why happened and what can be done, but also actually help them to build a resolve and find those options and actually then act on those options and go in a certain direction, which is, in my view, good for them as professionals as well as, as individuals, because no professional is just running the professional life. You have an entire life. When we were going through this phase where I was slowly kind of, pushing him towards finding out what is the different thing he can do, for example, which is because he has to find some other things. So he cannot go back to his comfort zone. It took around, I think, 3 or 4 sessions, which we normally were doing at 15 or 20 days intervals. And it was very tough. It was very tough for the gentleman to go through it. I could not just empathize with the situation, but I also felt that I had to really, really help him go through this situation, because he had a family, he had 2 children. Thankfully, his wife was working still, and they could manage their life on a day-to-day level. But once he came to this conclusion that he has to look beyond what he was comfortable with, this took, as I mentioned, I think 3 sessions or so. That is when he actually started looking, and within hardly another, I think, 4 weeks, he landed a good job. Now, this job was not exactly, fitting from what he was able to earn earlier and all that, or even the title that he had in the past. But this gave him a sense of release. I won't just say relief, but also a sense of release. And that made him start thinking even more about what other different things he can do. And within another 6 months, actually, he found something which then he found much happier to him. It was different from even what he was doing before COVID, but yet this was nearer to the CTC that he was making earlier. And yeah, in short, I would say he became a happy man.
Amit, earlier in the conversation, you spoke of 2 frameworks. One being on the tacit, the explicit side of things,
right,
and the other one being on the side of uncertainty and the challenges which comes along with it. I know with our discussions where that is your space where you have done a lot of work, can we go in depth with respect to this framework?
Yeah, I have to limit it, but yeah, between the 2 frameworks I mentioned, one is, of course, the explicit knowledge, and then the leap towards tacit knowledge that probably in the growth trajectory of any manager comes in, because you can't depend only on the explicit knowledge. Higher you go. The other framework is probably relevant to the topic today, which is growth is a function of your investment in complexity. So which is about, it's actually coming from a gentleman called Ralph Stacey. So there's a Stacey's chart of uncertainty or certainty and agreement. So Stacey qualifies the tasks in any organization into 3 parts primarily. One is where people are certain about what has to be done, how it has to be done, who has to do it, etc., tools, systems that are necessary for it. And then people are also in agreement that it has to be done, for example. So all the stakeholders, so jobs get done. So this is what Stacey calls as the simple tasks. You are dealing with knowns, but that's what constitutes almost 70% plus of any organization's activity or work. And on a day-to-day level, whether it's 9 to 5 or 9 to 9, people are working with knowns, which are about simple tasks. And this is where obviously you have to bring in the highest efficiency, the highest productivity, etc. But bear in mind, this is what your competition also knows. Okay, so you can't get any entry barriers or competitive advantage for long. If you are doing at the best possible, you are more efficient or more productive than your competition or alternative to your customers or buyers. And therefore, you may be having a lead of few weeks or few months, okay? But companies cannot survive like this, right? Or even as a team, as an individual. So, and then Stacey shows that, even if people are in agreement on the y-axis, you are not entirely certain about what has to be done. So you need some people to dig deeper, find out what needs to be done, how it has to be done, which may include technology, which may include tools, etc. So there are managers who have to handle this quadrant, which is little bit away from the certain side of it. And then there is another quadrant, which is where people are certain what has to be done and how it has to be done, what tools are necessary, what technologies are necessary, but people are not entirely in agreement, okay, right? So this is real life in organizations. Now you can't still start doing anything, although you know what has to be done, how it has to be done, till you get all the stakeholders on board. So you need managers or leaders, okay, to bring people on board. Now, just think about it that if you are somebody who can handle the relatively uncertain part of it, are you also the same person who can bring people on board, which is another quadrant? Okay, maybe the chart shows that. Now, normally in real life, people who are good at working on the uncertain side of it are not very comfortable working on how to bring people on board, because this is where you're dealing with different psychologies of the different people. So normally people who are good at bringing people on board are also likewise not very good at working on uncertain sides. So this is what Stacey calls it the complicated task, and this is where most managers actually spend maybe 10-15 years of their lives. And then you have beyond all this where everything is very, very uncertain. People are nowhere near any kind of agreement. This is what is complexity. So this is a zone of complexity. This is where both you as an individual or as an organization can find competitive advantage, can find entry barriers, and that is what then makes you grow if you invest there. So, and beyond that, Stacey calls it chaos. But what as a practitioner I came to on this Stacey's concept, which was fantastic when I came across it way back in late 90s, that if we are able to invest in this zone of complexity, either as an individual or as a team lead, manager, or as a management of a company, we will discover something which gives us a competitive advantage. We will find out something that has to be done which creates an entry barrier against our competition. Now consider an individual who is involved in this simple tasks, which is 70-75% of any organization's work. Now, if she has been doing this for a pretty long time, and she has a team who handles the day-to-day task, what does she do to grow? She cannot be there for a long time. Somebody from her team or from outside can also do what she has been doing as a manager, which is planning and, reviewing, assessing, and motivating the team that has to do it. Now, if she finds some other additional tasks, either in the uncertain side of the certainty axis or in the lack of agreement, where she is able to bring people on board or find out how to make the uncertainty certain, whether it is about tools, systems, processes, technologies, then she grows. Now, when she grows out of that position, somebody from her team also can grow, because somebody else who is doing those day-to-day simple tasks, which is simple for this lady who is the manager, for that person it is still probably explicit knowledge which she or he is not completely commanding. So this person gets to grow and replace this manager, and this manager goes into complicated tasks. So that's what I mean, that when you invest in what is complex for you, it creates growth for you and also for somebody in your organization or team. And as an organizational entity, the same concept can be used, that as an organization, as a company, you invest in those zones of complexity, and that's what leads you to growth. So that's the framework in the context of which I say that growth is a function of your investment in complexity.
That's amazing. I mean, changing that chaos into growth is something really appreciable to look into in that direction, because that's where the entire space is for you to play around, take that extra leap.
Absolutely.
So, while somebody is trying to do that, won't they get overwhelmed with the set of complexities that they're dealing with suddenly from the space of being simple task handler?
Getting overwhelmed is an individual situation, right? And how individuals handle when they walk into complexity. And bear in mind that it is still relative complexity. There are other people for whom what is complex for you may be actually simple tasks. Somebody who is, having more years in the same domain or the same organization. So that is what is called as the higher management of yours. For them, it may be simple. For them, some other level of complexity is waiting for them to grow. Okay, it's like a crankshaft. You grow, your senior grows, and senior grows. and your junior grows also. So getting overwhelmed is something which needs to be handled at an individual level, and that's where that person's management has to find somebody to coach that person how to not get overwhelmed. Because people who get overwhelmed would obviously, kind of shy away from plunging, because that's a natural reaction. If I'm scared of something, if something stresses me or something, I don't feel good about, I will kind of walk back from there. But we're talking about here leadership, individual leadership, organizational leadership. And that comes in when there are several factors. In fact, I spent some time into it, and I have a master's thesis on it many, many years back. So I could kind of touch upon a few factors what make people plunge into complexity. So one of them is, for example, anxiety. And anxiety, just like vulnerability we have spoken in the earlier episodes, is again something that can be used as a strength. Because it is anxiety. When I'm anxious, I'm looking at what can release me from the anxiety. And that's when I'm able to see those options dancing somewhere in the horizon, which I otherwise would not see. If I'm comfortable, I won't even, kind of look at the horizon, where there's this beautiful angels of different options dancing. So those are options. So to again go into complexity, to invest into it, you need to have real options, which you will not discover if you do not have this state of anxiety. Now, why this anxiety will come? Because you want to grow, because you have some dreams, because you have some goals which are beyond this comfort zone. Now, if somebody doesn't have that, poor fellow, then neither he will be anxious, nor he will spot those options dancing nicely in the horizon, nor will plunge into complexity. There are other factors too. For example, you will see that people who jump into complexity and make value out of it, they are also very emotionally attached to their goals. It is not always very good, because they find it difficult to unhook also if the goal is not any more appropriate or goes out of context, right? But yet people who are emotionally attached, for them anxiety comes easy, because they want to reach there, they want to go there. They may not know how to do it. There's complexity for them, but they plunge into it. And lastly, but very importantly, I would also mention that you have to have the reflection time. Because if you don't have the reflection time, if everybody is busy, right, you don't have the chance to even, raise your head and look beyond the horizon. You will obviously again not see those lovely angels of options dancing on the other side. So you need to have reflection time. Managers, more senior you become, need to have that pause, as we have spoken about in the earlier episodes, that need to have that little pause on a daily level and even otherwise. Even companies need to pause. They can't just simply go on executing one strategy. Strategy probably needs evergreening, because the context outside keeps on changing, as for an individual, as also for an organization.
So these are the missing links when they're cultivating the mindset towards getting into the complex side of things.
Absolutely.
Does innovation in technology has an impact on the implicit side of things when getting into the complexities?
Yeah, sure. I mean, people see innovation on technology happens not only on the certainty axis, on the uncertainty quadrant, relatively uncertain quadrant, but most significantly, it is the people who decide to invest in what is complex for them. If they are satisfied with what they are doing and what they know, there will be no innovation coming around, right? So for people to handle this relative complexity, those are the factors what I mentioned. I call them the Rubicon crossing factors. You have to cross the Rubicon in your head. So how do you cross it? Is anxiety, options, reflection time, your emotional attachment to your objectives, dreams, goals, whatever you have, and also that you actually act on it, which happens when in your mind there's a click and you cross the Rubicon. So innovation does not happen just because somebody is technically very good. If somebody reads everything that is there or is aware of what's going on in the world, that's necessary. That's like oxygen. But innovation happens when that individual actually jumps into what's the relative complexity for her or him and digs deeper. And then only innovation happens. So for that, that person has to have the reflection time. If that individual's management does not create an environment that brings out that reflection time or looking for options beyond the realm of comfort, company or the team or the individual is in, then no innovation will happen. So it is the leadership's responsibility. Everybody is a leader for sure, but the management, as we say, the leadership in an organization, to create an environment so that people where innovation is required or is asked for or is incentivized for, you can't really get innovation just by incentivizing. Sure. Nobody jumps into unknowns just because, some incentive is offered, because it is unknown whether he or she will ever get that incentive or not. Innovation happens when somebody wants to, breach the horizons of knowledge, wants to do something different, wants to do something new, not just for fashion, but because it leads to the fashion, to the goals, to the dreams that he or she believes in, that we should go as a team, as an organization, as an individual.
But most often they'll be clouded with the short-sightedness of reaching somewhere immediately.
We all know this, don't we? That, short-sightedness is, to be fair, I would say, I believe that it is a temporary manifestation of behavior of people. If I were to believe that short-sightedness is natural and permanent for people,
it's simpler for sure.
I would never coach people. No, sorry. I believe that people, yes, sometimes I also get short-sighted because probably I'm in a crisis. Probably, I'm so much occupied with so many things that I'm not able to look beyond the immediate, horizons or results that I have to achieve. So, and we are also, let's not forget that people who handle, whose life is at the cusp of, what I call you could say simplicity or known areas and unknowns or uncertains or lack of agreement, people who are at this cusp, they are people who already have some time, put in time behind them. They are senior people, middle managers and onwards, and they have families. So they have a lot that, they have to handle. You can't separate a professional from the personal life that this person has. You can't at this level, okay? Not at all. Okay, in the first 5 or 10 years, maybe you could afford the luxury, but not beyond that. So that is why in leadership positions, it is important to accept that for the individual that I am not just a professional dealing with my professional knowledge, domain, company, etc. No, I'm an individual. For me, I'm managing my entire life, and I have to lead this life where a subset of it, as I have said always, is my work domain, is my professional life. And therefore, innovation, growth, entry barriers, competitive advantage for individuals as well as organizations come through the leadership behavior of these individuals. It doesn't come just from a strategy that you buy from some consulting company, sorry. No, it doesn't. It comes from individuals who actually lead, who actually go and wade into the, the quagmire of complexity, relatively speaking, of course, right? And bring out something as a nice shell which has a nice pearl in it. Pearl of not just wisdom, but of value, of business value.
That's very well put out, Amit. Today's thing is so important because the dynamics of competitiveness, it's at its peak. It's relevant to every generation. It's always at its peak. It's always on a growing note.
Absolutely.
So on that aspect, this fits in so well for an individual and also for the organization, where they will be looking at coming out of having an extra advantage over the competitor.
Absolutely.
By investing on the complexity side of things and hitting towards the growth, like your chart says.
Yeah, see, one of my probably most precious possessions as a book is the famous book Competitive Advantage. And Michael Porter probably made millions of writing this book after publishing. Why? Because whether you are an individual, you are a team lead, you are a middle manager, senior manager, or the CEO of a company or the management team, without creating competitive advantage for you as an individual or as a manager or a leader or management, you have only one choice. Either you perish or you grow. This is a one-way traffic. Sorry.
You summed it up, Amit. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Vinay. Thank you for your questions and your thoughts. Thank you very much. So please subscribe our channel, The Missing Link with Amit. and see you again for the next episode.
We'll be coming up with more episodes similar to this, which will be more interesting and giving you insights about the missing link where you can grow in an organization and also as an individual. Thank you so much.